Okay, so after our little focus group exercise, I just want to talk a little bit more about focus groups and talk a little bit more about, the processes involved in focus groups. So what are focus groups? It's literally, you know, a small group of people, usually around, I've seen anything from about 7 people to 13 people as an ideal size for a focus group. Chat about a certain subject. As I said, they're really good for, thinking of ideas for new products. If our company is performing badly, how can we improve it? How can we engage more with customers? Um, Very much qualitative. We don't have to have a representative sample. We can often get, and I'll talk more about sampling in a minute. We can often, get a sample for a certain purpose, and they can be formed in different ways. We could either have, everybody sat around the table. We can have it increasingly. Focus groups are online as people are more and more comfortable with kind of online conferences. This is probably, I don't see that a little bit out of date, but we can also have, you know, people posting on a discussion board over time, um, and then kind of summating at the end of that. Okay, so we need to plan the focus group, we need to conduct the discussion, and then we need to analyze and report the results. So kind of, the three main steps for any analysis. Okay, so and I'll write this down a little bit. Okay, so first the participants that we have to sample. I think I've talked about this before, how in the US quite often we want a more diverse group to get more wider voices. But sometimes, for example, you know, in more kind of culturally homogeneous societies, I think Japan's a good example. Quite often, focus groups will aim to get a more homogenous group because people feel more open about opening up and talking with people more similar than them. So it's probably going to be a balance there. How do we recruit the participants? Okay, I will write this down because I usually put an exam question on this as a warning. Okay, so let's just kind of types of sampling. Let me just get the pen there. So the first is going to be purposive sampling. Let's just do a black pen actually. So purpose if sampling. And generally this means that we kind of select a sample for particular characteristics. So for our example, where we want to test cell phone addictions in Mississippi State students, we really just, we want to find some, we want to find some MSU students. Or if we're looking at maybe, consumer strategy, how do we engage with people whose English is a second language? Again, we want people, people with English as a second language. We in this would be actually a little bit more tricky as an example, as we'd probably want to, think about how do we, um, communicate with these people. It may be that we might have a focus group of Spanish speakers and have somebody who can speak Spanish as the moderator, or a group of people who would speak Arabic as a first language. We'd have to think a little bit more about that. Okay, so the next example is going to be stratified. Purpose purposive sampling. And here, we're thinking about, we want to kind of form some sort of contrast between groups. So we're looking at maybe contrast between groups. So, e.g., in our example, we may want to look at, our difference between how people use cell phones, humanities students versus engineers. Oh, I've got to move, so I'm just going to move up a little bit. Okay, so humanities students versus engineering students. And if we're a retail brand, such as, Walmart, we think we do well in certain segments, but not other segments, we'd maybe look, you know, look at people who are low income versus high income. Now, theoretical sampling is we're kind of looking at some of the relationships and potentially actually sampling people who aren't our original target. So let's just for a thingy, we have here our college student cell phone usage. So other people, there's going to be other people who impact. So we'd have college students. We'd have parents because they're often paying for the plans, and maybe they're checking your grades on Banner, and maybe they will be telling you don't spend as much time on your phone, do spend more time studying. Maybe, your roommates, again, how those communicate is going to affect your usage as well. Roommates, we'll put roommates slash friends. And then maybe also, your romantic partner. If that person uses the cell phone a lot for basic communications, that's obviously going to affect what you do. So theoretical sampling is just kind of almost involving other groups of people in kind of your sampling. So let's just get to this thing of conducting a focus group discussion. And again, this is pretty much for this class anyway. This is pretty self-explanatory. Just need to know if you get a multiple choice exam, know the difference between what a moderator does versus kind of what a scribe would do, etc. So the moderator is just making sure that we are on track in the session. As I said in Tuesday's class, a good moderator allows people kind of to give ideas for idea generation. So with my kind of Walmart plastic bag example, we could talk about maybe people pay for the bag, but they get a replacement every 6 months or something like that. It will allow people to come up with ideas, maybe ideas for new products, etc., but doesn't allow the group to go too off track. So the moderator will have a list of kind of questions, but they don't want to kind of you know, follow it exactly. We'd want to have a comfortable environment. We could start with introductions. We could have maybe a fun little task like, talk about your favorite movie or your favorite travel destination, but then kind of see into like the actual purpose of the focus group discussion. And at the end of the session, the moderator will go back and thank people for their participation and talk a little bit about what has been discussed and how maybe we're going to use that information. Okay, so next, quite often, if you're doing this as a small company, the researcher and the moderator would quite often be the same person. But if you're doing formal marketing research, maybe a third-party company, quite often the researcher would design the study, and then the moderator would actually, implement the study. Think about for academic research, I might design a study and then have a PhD student run through that. Now, the content analysis, again, I will go back to our whiteboard here. So let's just get a bit more room on the whiteboard. So imagine that we have a content analysis is really just structuring what we have. So imagine that we have a content analysis for our cell phone example, for cell phone addiction. What we will do is we'll look through the kind of the script or the transcribed like discussion, and we'll look for things that are interesting, things that are kind of we think are meaningful. And we'd kind of like maybe we'd just split into patterns. So if we'd start off by coding, so we'd look for all pieces of text or all conversations about the phone, and then we would look, somebody says, I love my iPhone. And somebody will talk about, the camera features, etc., etc. So we'd have any discussion about the phone. Then we'd have maybe everyday usage. So you know, I use it to check sports results, do my shopping, etc. And a little bit more like that. Then maybe we'd go to like studying and schoolwork. Okay, let's just say we've got collated comments. Let's just think of a few more. Then we'd look at maybe status and branding, again, a little bit related to the phone, but we could talk about, how my phone makes me feel, why I need an expensive phone, etc. Then we could finally go into this area of addiction. Do I feel addicted to my phone? So we'd literally take all the comments and all the discussion and try and code it to different categories. We may have kind of text that's in two categories. We may have something here. This might actually belong in the phone category, and in the I love my iPhone because it makes me feel important or something like that. You may have text that's in possibly two categories. So that's the content analysis. Is we're beginning to kind of try to just structure what we found, and then we can begin to do some further research and make a few more little conclusions. Okay, so let me just kind of summarize this off. Is, what are the advantages and disadvantages? Well, it's a way to generate new ideas. If we want an idea about a new topic, or maybe we want ideas for how to reduce cell phone addiction, or if we were a company, maybe we're designing an app that tracks cell phone usage and tries to get you off your phone a little bit. You can understand consumers, what are your needs? Do you need a phone to communicate with your friends? Do you need a phone for status? Um, if it's business to business, we can actually allow us to begin to chat with clients. So I said I worked for Dow Jones, and we used to have clients with all the major kind of clients of all the major kind of investment banks like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. It allows us to sit down with clients, and they can tell us what they think is good about our service, what's bad about service. Um, and particularly online focus groups, we can kind of bring together quite a range of people who we wouldn't not usually reach. As with all qualitative research, it lacks generalizability because we don't have this specific large random sample, and we have less reliability. And the researcher can bias it. So, if I come into the discussion thinking, oh, this generation, it's terrible, they're all addicted to their cell phones, and I'm not particularly open-minded, that can affect things. And again, if I'm talking about, political views, if I'm biased one way or the other, that again could affect the analysis. And also, maybe we had a group of like 10 people. If we have one or two people who are quite charismatic and talk a lot, they could perhaps outweigh all the other group members and kind of dominate the conversation and force other people to kind of come around their way of thinking. So, focus groups are not perfect. Okay, so here's just a little example. I think over the last few years we've seen enough of this sort of setting, but that's just an example. It's very much like we use WebEx for classes, but generally you would want to see everybody at once. You don't get quite as much kind of body language and cues as you would do in an in-person setting, but increasingly online focus groups are kind of the way to go.